it's been great chatting with everyone and just hearing a lot of your stories. And I'm just so happy to be here back in Pittsburgh. It is here where everything started, really, for my second novel, which I actually just introduced yesterday, which went into pre-order on Amazon, and it goes on sale officially on July 8th. It's Beneath the Sicilian Stars, and it is partly set in Pittsburgh and Concord. And the reason why it's also set in Concord is because Executive Order 9066, which was signed by President Roosevelt, actually declared all of the Italians, Japanese, and Germans to be enemy aliens before the U.S. went to war. So this was on the night of December 7th, the date that will live in infamy, was also the day when the U.S. officially declared war on the Axis powers and began rounding up people who they suspected of fascism or Nazism to be interned. So they were going to houses in the middle of the night on December 7th, starting then, and arresting Italians, Germans, and Japanese people that they had lists for since spring of that year, 1941. So they've been watching these people for a while.
Rose said, "Don't go. I will go when I have a chance."
Sorry.
So my book actually details I was inspired by the book Una Storia Segreta, which is by Lawrence de Stasi, which I recommend that everyone read because there's a chapter called Pittsburgh Stories. And it was from that book, that chapter specifically, that I discovered Pittsburgh, California. And it led me down a rabbit hole. I would later discover the documentary Potentially Dangerous. And the filmmaker, Zach Favila, had interviewed several people here in Pittsburgh, including Vince Ferrante, who is the vice president over at the Pittsburgh Historical Museum.
Italian American Club, too.
Yeah, and so I came to Pittsburgh, and that's where I started my research. And I decided that once I learned a lot more about Pittsburgh and the people who essentially started this community, it was largely Sicilian. There was a large population that had come from a place called Isola della Femmina, and several of you here have ancestors who are from there. And it was a little fishing village that in the late 19th century, two brothers, Aiellos, came to Pittsburgh. First, they started off in New Orleans, and they were doing clam digging, and they ended up, because of the yellow fever, leaving New Orleans for Oregon, where they were doing some more fishing. They heard about fishing in San Francisco, so they went south. Once they got to San Francisco, they heard about this great opportunity in the San Joaquin Sacramento River Delta, in this place that at that time was Black Diamond. And that they decided they're going to go back to Isola, and they're going to tell all their friends and family, there's this place where the fish are plentiful, and there's not as much competition as you'll find in San Francisco. And so they started this community. That community eventually became Pittsburgh, named for the city to the east because of the industries. And that city is where my story starts, because that city, a third of the population of that city was evacuated because of these presidential orders. There were 10,000 Italian immigrants who were evacuated from their homes because of their Italian descent. And they were told to within days find a new place to live, but get away from the coast or places of industry or military importance. So there were many people. Paula had some family members. Several of you also did have friends or know people that were evacuated. And a lot of them moved to places like Concord or Oakley. And in certain places like Oakland or San Francisco, the restrictions were such that you could be living on one side of the street and the other side of the street was restricted.
Mm-hmm.
There was a case, there's a man named Mr. Bronzini that I spoke with, who's down in Oakland, and his father had a store. And because he was an enemy alien, he couldn't go to his store anymore because it was restricted. So he would call across the street to the people the employees at the store to tell them what to do, because he couldn't go across the street because he was an enemy alien and he was restricted. So there's cases like that. But there's also cases where there were hundreds of these men, as I mentioned, who were rounded up in the middle of the night and sent off to internment camps, where they were doing these long-term tours of duty, where they would be rotated from camp to camp in a constellation of camps across the United States. And they didn't often know what they did. All they knew is that they were determined to be potentially dangerous. So, that is just to say that was one of the main reasons why I was interested in coming here today to talk about my book, is because of this connection to this community, and because it's something that it has been a hidden history for far too long. And people like Lawrence Distossi, the author of Una Storia Sagrada, and others have been trying to get that word out. And so my effort here with producing historical fiction is to get it into even more hands so that people can learn lessons from history, what has happened in the past, so that we cannot repeat those again. So I'm going to read a couple passages. First, I can read, I guess, which would you like to hear? Would you like to hear The Last Letter from Sicily, which was actually inspired by the story of my grandparents, who, a completely different story, who came to the United States. My grandmother came to the United States from a little town called Porticello, Sicily, which is just outside of Palermo. And her family came in 1939, and she was separated from the love of her life, Gaetano, who stayed in Porticello, and then the war happened. And so the relationship, this long-distance relationship, how it could survive all those years, largely without communication, really inspired me to write this book. And in the course of writing this book, doing that research, I stumbled on Una Storia Sagrada, which led to the second book. So I guess we'll start with The Last Letter from Sicily, because that's what we advertise this program to be about. And it is available for sale here. And I will be signing books. And on your seat, I provided bookmarks where if you scan this code, or if you just type in my website address, you can find a link to this book for pre-order. It's going to be released on July 8th, and I look forward to hearing from you once you get your hands on it. So, I guess to start, I'm going to start with a scene from The Last Letter from Sicily, and it's a scene that takes place in Porticello. Just when Gaetano wondered if Concetta had changed her mind, he heard the clip-clop of her familiar heeled shoes approaching. He lit a match so she could see him, then blew it out. She skipped toward him, and he laughed. He took her into his arms and inhaled her scent. "What's this?" he asked, gesturing to her burlap bag. "I thought we could enjoy a toast on the rocks." Concetta opened the bag and produced 2 goblets. "You stole those from the church?" "No, silly. They are my parents." "But what will we toast with?" "I know a tabacceria where we can find something." And so he brought her to his mother's store. It was nearly midnight, and no one else was on the street. He fiddled with the chain and unlocked the gate before pulling up the accordion-style door. "Will an aranciata suit you?" he asked with a smile, lifting a small bottle from the refrigerator box. "Si, Signor Aliotto. You know what they say. In aranciata, veritas. In aranciata, there is truth." She laughed. "Who says such a thing?" "The makers of aranciata, of course," he said before reaching for a half-eaten baguette. "Oh, and we cannot forget the bread. One must break bread after a toast." He spotted a woolen blanket and tucked it under the other arm. They carried their picnic items down the winding, narrow street, under the moon's soft light, following the path to the port. Fishermen were already singing O Sole Mio when they arrived. The 2 spread the blanket on their favorite rock, which was large enough for 2 of them to sprawl out easily, and they promptly did just that. "We need a toast," Concetta said, pulling out the goblets as Gaetano opened the soda. "To tomorrow. May your passage be safe," he said. It hit him. This was the last time he would see Concetta. Perhaps forever. But he couldn't let that be true. And then he noticed she was crying. He softly brushed a tear from her almond-shaped brown eye and cupped her round cheek. "Shh," he said, drawing her close. "It will be okay. We will be okay. Ad astra per aspera. To the stars through difficulties." He realized that he, too, had tears in his eyes. They held each other tightly on the cold rock and said nothing for a long time. Then a fisherman's voice cracked and the 2 laughed. "Yes," she said, taking a large gulp of the soda. "We will be okay." "And you'll be back soon," he said, realizing he was reassuring himself too. "Si," she said, "soon." Then they heard a loud boom. It startled them, and they turned toward the sound to see sparks raining down from the sky. "Fireworks!" Gaetano pointed to the boat where amateur pyrotechnics were being set off. The 2 watched as men lit fuses of another batch of fireworks and sent them sailing into the air. Gaetano could feel the vibrations across the rock as the fireworks sizzled and popped, and he could smell the sulfur scent enveloping them. This was their moment. Only they mattered, and he wanted to hold on. Gently, he took Concetta's hand and squeezed it. He drew her onto his lap, and he held her tight while nuzzling her neck. The sky lit up red, green, and white, and he knew they'd both remember this night forever. They watched as each set of fireworks outdid the one before, popping and hissing and booming into the sky. And then it was quiet. Motes of dust fell, illuminated in the glow of the nearly full moon. "Bravo!" shouted Gaetano, clapping, and she joined him. "Of course, I planned this," Gaetano said, with a wink. "Nonsense," she laughed. Their eyes met, and he pulled her in for a kiss. Her lips were soft, and her body was warm in the cool night. "To us," she said, standing as she held her goblet to the moon. He touched his goblet to hers. "To us." He walked her as far as a block before her house. He didn't want to risk being seen by her father. She didn't need that on her last night. "Wait. I almost forgot," he said, fishing for something in his pocket. "I have something for you." She smiled as he placed a slim wooden box in her hand. "Thank you." She opened the box and ran her finger across a pearlescent green surface of a fountain pen. "A practical present. It's almost too beautiful to write with," she said. "Well, I hope you will use it." "Of course I'll use it. The postman will be busy with all the letters I plan to send." She kissed him one more time before placing her hand on his cheek and looking him in the eyes. "Arrivederci," she said. "I'll see you soon," he said. And he watched her walk away, her shadow stretching across the alley until he could see it no more. So that is a taste of the last letter from Sicily.
Wait till you read the book. You haven't.
So I am going to read a passage. So that passage, by the way, is, as you guessed, probably her last night in Sicily. And that is when her father has told them that they're going to move to the United States. And so she doesn't know what the future is going to bring. And it's a story that, you know, once the war started, a lot of couples were separated. But their case was unique in that they were separated between two warring nations. And so unlike other couples who could write, once Italy was at war with the United States, communication was severely restricted. And so that's why one of the letters became the last letter from Sicily. So, here is a sneak preview, and you are all the very first to hear this writing because, as you know, it's in pre-order status, so it's not available yet. So this is the first audience that's hearing this.
Okay, good.
Other than my publisher.
I like that.
So, and now it's being recorded too, so this is your sneak peek. Chapter 1, December 7th, 1941, Pittsburgh, California. Static crackled through the aging speaker as Annalisa Aiello's father, Vincenzo, turned the radio dial in search of the right station. The soft orange glow of the vacuum tubes was almost too faint to be seen in the Sunday morning light. The sun poured through the window, reflecting off the glass, covering their family portrait. Annalisa and Papa gazed out with deep-set eyes above chiseled cheekbones, while their older brother Mario's features favored those of her mother, Maria, with a more pointed chin. His face was distinguished by a pencil eraser-sized mole on his left cheek. Together, they smiled broadly in that bittersweet moment just before they said their goodbyes. The photograph was taken with Mario's box camera on the day the Aiellos sent him off with the Navy to Honolulu. So far from the only home he'd ever really known. It was a world apart from what was sometimes a challenging life in the East Bay city of Pittsburgh, California, where Annalisa had grown up. Her parents had arrived 2 decades earlier, fresh from Italy, with baby Mario in tow. The dial landed on the right frequency, and Annalisa heard the familiar sing-song jingle of the Jell-O program starring Jack Benny. The entertainer launched into a humorous intro while the 16-year-old hunched over her math homework on the coffee table. Pots and pans banged in the kitchen as her mother prepared their afternoon supper. The faint smell of garlic permeated the air. Annalisa scribbled answers to various equations, some more challenging than the rest, but half of her attention remained on Benny and the program she hated to miss. About 15 minutes in, she set down her pencil and leaned in beside Papa, who laughed heartily as Benny acted out the parts of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was a spoof on a film that she and her father had seen downtown at the California Theater. She remembered how Spencer Tracy had acted out the different sides of the composite figure. Hyde was unpredictable and critical, while Dr. Jekyll was gentlemanly and charming. In a funny way, the duality reminded her of her mother. There were rare moments when Mama smiled in wistful reflection, channeling her memories of growing up in Isola della Femmina, Sicily. It was in these instances that Annalisa would learn things, like how her mother grew up surrounded by the aroma of her own father's fresh-baked bread and helped build cannoli for his bakery. We used fresh sheep milk ricotta so we could only really make them in the winter months, Mama had once recalled with a softness in her voice. That was back when we didn't have refrigeration. Then Annalisa had smiled, eager to learn more. But the moment had passed, and she'd seen her mother's face harden. "You're slouching again," she'd snapped. "Who's going to want to marry a girl who can't sit upright in church?" The teenager often wondered who and when she might meet, who would want to be her husband. Several boys had interested her over those years, but those were crushes, really. While she chatted with classmates who sat at her sides, she never spent time with them outside of school. She didn't dare bring anyone home for fear of what they'd think, how they might judge her parents. She glanced at her father, who was still absorbed in the program. At least he spoke English, unlike her mother. Still, his thick Sicilian accent sometimes clouded his words, leaving store clerks and church parishioners staring without comprehension. Worse still were the laughs and name-calling of neighbor children that haunted her dreams. She thought about it as the laughter rang out in Benny's studio audience. But then, something peculiar happened. Benny was cut off mid-sentence as another man's clipped voice suddenly took command of the airwaves. "We interrupt this program to bring you a special announcement, live from Honolulu, Hawaii. We have witnessed this morning the severe bombing of Pearl Harbor and the attack of the city of Honolulu by the Empire of Japan. There has been serious fighting in the air and sea. More than 350 men have been reported killed by a direct bomb on Hickam Field. Witnesses report that at least 3 ships were attacked, and the USS Oklahoma was set afire. This is a developing story." Benny's monologue resumed, along with the laughter. It was as if the whole event hadn't happened. But at that moment, Annalisa's pale brown eyes met those of her father. Something terrible had happened in Honolulu. There you go.
Good. Okay.